What if fear of the truth didn't hold us back?
Instead of having to do the research yourself, we've done it for you. Tune in each week as real moms drop some truth bombs.
Answers start now.
Welcome back to Truth Moms. Today's episode is all about the food dye fight. So let's go ahead and drop some truth bombs. But first, let me introduce our amazing guests, Brandon and Whitney Cawood. After discovering their child's sensitivity to synthetic dyes, Brandon and Whitney Cawood, parents turned filmmakers, embarked on a journey to uncover the hidden impacts of these additives. Their documentary, To Die For, combines scientific insights and personal stories from affected families, revealing the unseen dangers of synthetic dyes. Through expert interviews and heartfelt narratives, the Cawoods aim to raise awareness of the profound effects these chemicals can have in individuals and families alike. Sorry, I don't have my glasses.
Well, thanks for coming. Yeah, all of that to say that we were just excited.
Yes.
I've been a fan of you. I've been following it since the Facebook group. So I'm kind of a super fan over here. So I was like, we have to get them on when we got Truth Moms. Why don't you guys talk about that story, from the beginning? So you figured out that your child had, a synthetic food dye kind of allergy, right? And then you kind of went down this rabbit hole, which I think most moms do in our case. We have a child, something happens, and we're like, wait a minute, there's a lot we didn't know in this realm.
Yeah, so between the ages of 1 and 3, Atreyu was really starting to exhibit some aggression and just some troubling symptoms. And a lot of that can be normal with a 1, 2, 3-year-old, but it was the intensity and the amount of times it happened per day and how concerned his mother's morning out was. And every time we went to church, it was just an issue after issue after issue, especially with the aggression being our main issue. And we tried to do our due diligence. We did the therapy visits. We consulted doctors. But he was so very inconsistent in that some days would be really great, but most days would be really rough. And so we really didn't feel good about having a diagnosis at 3.
Yeah.
So we decided to try looking into his diet. So I found an article that suggested eliminating wheat, dairy, and synthetic dyes. And so we did that. And within 48 hours, he was a completely different kid. That kid that we saw on those good days, we had that kid for 30 days straight. Whereas he was probably regularly hitting us pretty often, probably 10 times a day, to where that month he may have hit us once or twice, which is within normal. I feel like that's within the normal range. And so, and that I like to say that eliminating dyes kind of eliminated 98% of our issues. And then that 2%, he could slow down, we could work with him, we could talk through that 2%, and so much progress was made even in that 2%. Yeah. And so after the 30-day elimination diet, I reintroduced wheat and it had no effect. And then about a week later, we reintroduced dairy and it had no effect. And then when we reintroduced dyes, within 15 minutes, all those behaviors we were seeing before came flooding back.
That's what's so wild.
That is crazy.
Part of the
How
story.
quick.
We took 2 days to kind of change it out, and it took 15 minutes for it to come.
I remember we actually watched it on the premiere night together. We got together and she paused it. She was 15 minutes? Are you kidding
wild.
me?
It is wild.
Yeah.
He reacts very strongly. Not all children react that quickly,
Right.
But it is pretty obvious when he does have a reaction. And then even since then, we've had instances where we didn't know something had dyes, especially toward the beginning of our journey. We didn't realize that name brand marshmallows have blue one. And one mini marshmallow threw off 48 to 72 hours. And we had another instance with a temporary tattoo, which we would have never thought at that point about dermal exposure, which I guess I should preface and say, there aren't any formal studies to show that dyes can go into our blood system, but we know that things that go into, that we put on our skin can go into our blood system. And so for him, he does have a reaction to even dermal exposures. But fast forward 3.5 years later, he's doing so well. Good. He's in a STEM school, and he's been in public school for almost 3 years now. And he hasn't had a single incident where he's hurt a child or been upset and yelled or anything. And so we sit down at parent teacher conferences and we're like, okay, what can we do? They're like, well, standardized testing, he's in the 99th percentile in reading and math. He's good. So I'm like, okay, behavior, is there anything we can work on with behavior? They're like, no, he's great. The biggest issue is sometimes he gets mad at his friends for not following the rules. And I'm like, okay. Like, this is a stark contrast between, I thought I was going to have to homeschool him, which I still go back and forth between homeschooling.
Yeah.
But I thought I was going to have to homeschool him to protect other children and to protect him.
Oh, right, because you can't. I mean, we talk about you're saying public school. We were just talking about public school foods, right? And to be able to have that conversation with him and make sure that he understands, right? But it actually, kids are resilient in that sense. We have a friend who has a 4-year-old, and made her own childcare because of this exact reason. And she was like, her 4-year-old was like, "Does that have food dye in it? I can't have that," right? Like, and it's so easy to get them. You know, like she said, it makes my tummy hurt, or it makes me makes my brain fuzzy, right?
Yeah.
It's so easy to get them to understand that. So is that where you're headed as well with the?
Yeah, we've had that same experience. He's done really well with like reading labels, and I think it's his personality type too. Like, he likes to follow the rules. He likes to do
Is he your firstborn?
the right thing. He is a firstborn. Yeah.
Makes sense.
And well, our secondborn is like that as well, but especially him. He cares a lot about the rules. But you know, public school hasn't been as difficult as we expected. The teachers, like, they've seen reactions like this, and they believe it, and I think it's more common knowledge. And for him, one of the first words that he learned how to read was like red, yellow, blue, so that he could like identify that on the label. So he's kind of killing it in regards to
amazing.
like,
That's amazing.
reading labels.
Yeah, luckily, because we figured it out so early.
Yeah.
It's just kind of a part of his, and even our daughter, she doesn't seem to have like a sensitivity to dyes, but you know, nobody in our house eats dyes, so they are very vigilant about asking, you know, what's in this? Does this have food dyes in it? If so, I can't eat it. And
which is wild because they're so different from child to child, right? We talked to a friend of ours who is a functional coach, and she has a mold autoimmune disorder, and she was like, nobody else in my family has it, so it's really hard to explain it. So it's wonderful that you guys were like, look, it doesn't really affect everybody else in the household, but we do know it affects our son, and that's enough for us to make these changes. And I think that's wonderful.
And you guys are doing so much to make other, you know, aware of, of what, you know, potentially could happen. So just eliminating those from the beginning, or this might be something that's, I mean, it's just amazing what you guys are doing.
So bring us to that point where you were like, we need to make a documentary on this.
Well, speaking of the group where you said that you first discovered us, Whitney, after we figured out what was going on with Atreyu, we assumed, okay, she assumed. I was, you know, it took a little convincing for me to get in. I mean, once I saw the change in him, I was on board, but even initially, like, let's try this, I mean, it sounds a little kooky, but we'll give it a shot.
But he was always supportive. He wasn't like sneaking in dyes. He was just like, okay, we'll see.
That's how my husband
I think
is about.
all husbands are like that.
Like, oh, okay, we'll run your round. Okay, and then, like a couple weeks later, you're like, something to
And
this.
then I literally heard him last night on Instagram listening about dyes, and I was like, all right, there we are.
Love it.
Well, Whitney was like, you know, she started looking at the research and figured out there was a pretty good bit of research, but it's pretty complex. You know, even reading the abstract is hard to understand. Right. And so at the same time, she was part of a Facebook group, but kind of felt she wanted to start her own Facebook group with a little bit of a twist, more of a community for people to talk about swaps and like options and things like that. And so we assumed early on that what was going on with him was pretty rare. And I mean, in the big scheme of things, like a sensitivity as big as his is, I don't even know if I'd call it rare, but it's not the norm.
It's less common.
But we started the Facebook group, or Whitney started the Facebook group, and now the Facebook group is a little under 3 years old, and we've gone from 0 to 840,000 members. So we've heard thousands of stories like similar to ours or even worse. And the Facebook group kind of took off pretty quickly. And then we started kicking around the idea of the documentary, because we saw, okay, there's more to this than we realized. There's a lot of people that it's affecting. And if this many people have realized that this is an issue, how many people don't even know it's an issue?
Right.
And so that's kind of what started the journey. And then I don't know how we convinced all these scientists and experts to like, I mean, we say it's God. Like, God opened a lot of doors for us. And on paper, looking at where we were when we started and what we ended up with the film, should have never happened. Like, 2 parents from Georgia shouldn't have been able to interview all these people and make this documentary the way that we did. And so, but it was just a series of meeting one person, that person knew somebody else, and the kind of domino effect and God opening doors like that. So it's been a pretty cool journey. And so we took 2.5 years interviewing experts and affected families. We flew all over the U.S. We flew to England, interviewed Dr. Stevenson, who is the leading researcher for the warning label they have in the EU on certain synthetic dyes. And so it was a journey, and now we're here today. The film came out in January, and it's
around my
been,
birthday. I was like, best birthday present. I'm like waiting. I'll tell you guys how I found. So I had my firstborn was born in February about 3 years ago, and when we started talking about what we were going to introduce, I've always been those like skeptical things, right? So this doesn't really have to do with food dyes, but it was the something about, there's a doctor on Instagram that was talking about the first thing that we normally feed babies is this rice cereal. Right. And this rice cereal is made of flour, and basically it goes into sugar, right? We've talked about this before.
Right.
And how that's not good for the gut health. And so I started like trickling in, and somehow I came across To Die For, the documentary. I don't even know how it happened. And then I started following the Facebook group, and I remember looking at PJ and being like, we're never doing food dyes. But it was just like it was a very instant reaction. And then we see a kind of holistic functional doctor as well. And one of the things that she offers, we interviewed them, called MaxGen, which is epigenetics to really look at your child. And she was like, honestly, it's probably a better route that you don't, because there is some MTHFR, SNP, and things like that. And so it was kind of just a massive information that all came at once. And then I started following you guys intently, and I was like, okay. And so I would send it to all my girlfriends who were having new babies, and I was like, you need to see this. And we just kept looking at your trailer, and I was like, it's coming, guys. It's coming.
She literally kept sending it to me. She's like, it's coming.
Every update. And so what you want to talk about God and divine timing. I mean, it came out right as this huge wave of like, Food Babe and all of those hearings. And even now you guys are in Tennessee because there's a committee hearing on food dyes in Tennessee, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So it really is like, I mean, you guys hit it like literally at the right time.
Yeah, no, that definitely wasn't us, because we wanted the film to be out last year, January of last year. And we were a little bit disappointed it was taking longer than we expected. But literally the day after our film like launched to the public, Red 3 was banned nationwide.
Yes, no, I remember that.
And of course that's not because of our documentary, of course. Right. But like just being in the mix and being part of the movement was so cool, and like what timing.
Yeah.
And just right now in this session season, we have either 15 or 16.
I think we're at 17 now.
17 states that we know
specifically on
of
synthetic dyes
that have legislation on the table
or working on it,
addressing synthetic
and you're
dyes.
Actively a part of this.
Yeah.
So you're no longer just a bystander or even a documentary, basically like, here's the information, do with it what you will. You're in it.
Yeah.
You're
So
testifying.
the 4 states that have passed bills, we've been like an active part in all of those. And most recently, West Virginia, little West Virginia, just passed a bill to ban it in the state. And so it's on the governor's desk. So we're really hoping that he signs it. But working with these states it's been really eye-opening to see how much money and how much pushback industry is willing to give. And we were expecting that, but it has also been, certain aspects of it has been pretty shocking. How much money they're willing to put into like stopping legislation.
Now that the West Virginia bill has passed the Senate and the House, now they're running radio ads in West Virginia talking about how it's going to, this bill, if the governor signs, it's going to pull 60% of groceries off the shelves. And that's been the threat. That's been the threat from industry prices. Is like, you guys are West Virginia. You have 1.8 million people. We're not going to make a special variety of food just for West Virginia. But I think what West Virginia has done is they've been the first ones brave enough to step out and do that. And we hope it's like the first domino. Yeah. Oklahoma has a bill in place right now that's a statewide ban. We just talked with a representative in North Carolina. They've got a bill they're putting out that's a statewide ban. New York has a school ban, and then
because California was the first with the school ban, right? But they said the same thing about California. We haven't heard anything about the kids not having enough to eat. Right?
Well, it hasn't gone into effect yet. So California doesn't go into effect until December 31st, 2027.
Okay. So this is the last question we had. So we have a babysitter. I love her, and she had made the statement. She was like, "Well, with all this stuff going as fast as it is in RFK, like hopefully next year." And I was like, "Nope, that's not how that works, right?" So talk about that process, because I come from a standpoint of a little bit disenfranchised, right? You see a little bit of action and then you're like, oh, but it hasn't happened yet. And
I'm very hopeful.
She's very hopeful.
Yeah, I'm very hopeful. I'm like,
me
it's
too.
going to happen. Any little tiny step that we can take to get there is the step in the right direction.
Right, exactly.
Well, and that's the only way you can get it
Especially in your shoes,
accomplished.
yeah.
Like we know firsthand, it takes a lot to pass bills, and it takes a lot to get people on board. And especially like a tiny state like West Virginia, the threats that they're making are pretty scary. And so we really wanted to make sure that they had enough time. I mean, we would love it, and the people that worked on the bill would have wished that it was implemented a little bit sooner. But giving them a little bit of time for other states to take action is helping them not be on an island. So it was relatively reasonable. So we're trying to see it from a logistics perspective, and we also have an interesting perspective in that I both have one of my best friends, her father-in-law works in the candy industry and like literally the Candy Hall of Fame.
Wow.
And he has been a great supporter, but he's also given us like a lot of insider information and how the logistics work. And we also have like a loved one that works in the beverage industry and how she actually works in formulating different drinks. And so we do know that it does take time. So we know that has to be realistic if they're going to change it. Right. But we also know in talking with Scott from EWG, and he's worked with industry for a very long time, that they can do it within a year. So giving them at least a year is reasonable. But change is slow, and that's a reality. But to me, I feel like I'm like you, like I'm kind of an eternal optimist. The fact that so many states are actually stepping up, whereas states have not stepped up in this way before, is incredible. And especially like, it's not just California. California oftentimes leads on things like this, but it's Republicans and Democrats. Like these votes are almost unanimous. In most of the states, they've been overwhelming majority of people, Democrats and Republicans, are like getting on board with protecting children and getting harmful chemicals out of the
and
the
that's
food
something
system.
that I really want to get across too, is that it is truly a bipartisan. This is a child issue, right?
Yes.
Like we were talking about just medications, even antibiotics having red 40 in them. And we were like, look, it's not just, the food industry or the beverage industry. It is all over that these are being kind of instituted in everything that we take, right? A temporary tattoo, for example. So when we start to think about how change needs to be implemented, you're like, yeah, on the ground level, maybe food, but it's a lot bigger than that. And that's, I think, where, big pharma, big food, all of them are like, wait a minute, hold on, it's going to take a lot, right?
Yeah.
But again, I think what I love about, our Truth Mom stuff is that we really take this down and we're like, look, it's not going to happen overnight. Nothing happens overnight, right? I've been watching you guys for a couple of years, right? But and that's just getting information out there. Now, legislation takes a lot more time. And I'm going to bet that Food Babe and, we always reference a culture apothecary. Everybody who's been on the front line with y'all has seen how long it does take and will take. And so you just kind of have to.
And the pushback.
Yeah, and the pushback, right?
Well, and a lot of these bills too, like what you're seeing like Oklahoma, their bill has it's 21 chemicals, and it's not just a statewide ban, it's also a school ban, and I think it's also a warning label. So she's like, Governor Senator Thompson, she's like going hard.
Senator Thompson for president. I'm just going to throw that out there.
But a lot of these things, a lot of times these things in the bills are also like negotiation tactics and things like that, and the implementation date, that's kind of like West Virginia kind of had to flex on that because there was some senators that weren't going to sign it if it was that soon. So there's a whole lot that goes into it. There's a lot of politics. It's sad that it does take a lot of politics. I think something that we're, at least like personally moving forward in the states that we work with, we're going to suggest, even if you do a school ban or even if you do a statewide ban and it does have to implement in 2028 or 2027, let's also add in a warning label requirement, because how can you argue with a warning label? Like, okay, we're banning this food in 3 years, so we know it's dangerous. So how hard is it to change your packaging with a one line that says, can cause hyperactivity or whatever in children?
Right.
So that's, and you can't argue with that. Like,
no, and people might not have access to this information.
Exactly.
So at least they're getting that for sure.
All right, real quick, if you're loving this chat, let's make it official. Hit follow, leave a quick review, and take a screenshot to share on your Instagram story. Tag us at Truth Moms Pod so we can send you some love. All right, back to it.
What were some challenges or the most surprising thing that you found during your research of synthetic dyes?
In regards to synthetic dyes, I can say that our child was primarily receiving dyes through like his daily allergy medicine, and then like the occasional like birthday party treat or something like that. And so I really was trying to avoid, additives in our food, but I really didn't, if I'm being honest, I didn't know what I was avoiding. I just knew that organic was better.
Right.
And so when we started this process, I kind of began by digging into the research, and it was honestly overwhelming to me. And so I had a lot of questions, but then I stopped whenever we decided to make a documentary. I stopped learning because I wanted to come at it from a very fresh perspective. And I didn't want to know the answers to a lot of the questions because I didn't want to ask too high level question. I wanted this documentary to be something that just the average person could watch.
Right.
And so when we had our first interview, she said that synthetic dyes were a chemical. And then I was like, a chemical, like it's literally a chemical, like oftentimes a byproduct of petroleum. And like, I'm like petroleum, like that's legal.
Yeah.
So the fact that we had chemicals in our food, which many of your listeners are probably going to roll their eyes, like, how did you not know that? But that's the reality of where I was in my journey, like that we have chemicals in our food and that they're approved and that they're oftentimes tested. Like industries doing the testing, and the FDA is not testing to see if they're safe before they go into like our food supply. So that was really shocking to me.
I think for me, what's been revealing even over the past year or so is the information is all over the place. There's lots of misinformation, which doesn't help the cause. There's a lot of some of it's like strategically, saying that bans or dyed or banned or heavily regulated makes it sound like dyes are banned in a lot of countries, which some of the dyes are, but like even in the EU, they're not necessarily banned. They require a warning label, so therefore even American manufacturers don't want a warning label, so they reformulate for the EU.
Right.
There's just a lot of like little nuances of the information so there's a lot of, I don't know, there's a lot of misinformation, and so we've been really focused on like, we want to know the facts. We want to know like the true answers to these things, so when we do speak somewhere, we do testify, or we do prepare a sponsor of a bill to like make sure that they're putting out the right information, because you don't want that to be a stumbling block later on that you misspoke about something that wasn't correct.
Right.
We want to make sure that the true information comes out. And also like the fact that the biggest thing is the opposition's like rhetoric of how there's no research showing that these dyes are bad.
Yeah.
When that's completely a lie.
It's 27 clinical trials looking at children and behavior, and that's one of the most tested additives on the U.S. market.
Right.
And
like they're literally lying.
Yeah.
And the fact that so many people believe that lie and that it's just being like publicized, but then also the fact that other countries have new formulas or different formulas than we do. I thought that was really shocking.
Yeah,
to
well,
me.
that was, so we had this conversation about that because I was really big about seed oils. That was my other big thing. I was like, if we did formula, I didn't want seed oils. And my husband was the one who was like, by the way, even if they import it, they have to insert a seed oil in the U.S. formula. And I was like, I had a girlfriend that was like, no way, because we just got it from the U.K. And sure enough, right?
It's right on there.
And those are all things that were kind of eye-opening to me. And one of my biggest ones when you're talking about misinformation and out there was, people do come in, like there's not enough studies and so my argument back was, if you listen to the FDA themselves, the reason why you think there's not enough studies is because they did not study that themselves. The one thing that they admitted, right, was for 10 plus years, they haven't done any update on Red 40 themselves to see that. So yes, when you're saying there's not enough studies because the people who are pushing that propaganda out there aren't doing the studies themselves. So you have these independent studies coming out saying, yes, right, there's clinical trials, but the FDA hasn't done it on their own, and they're approving these
even
things.
That 10-year thing is misleading. Like, they didn't reevaluate the chemical 10 years ago. They got together in a meeting and talked about it.
Like we're meeting.
Yeah,
wow.
like they got
literally just, hey, have you heard about Red 40?
A couple hour,
really?
a couple hour
So
meeting.
no like scientists in a lab.
It was a couple hour meeting, and so like these chemicals really haven't been evaluated since the 60s and 70s.
Right.
And so most of the rhetoric that comes out, because every single place that we've gone to, or every interview that we've done on the news, or every article that we've been in, they always get a statement from the International Association of Color Manufacturers. So they are the association that protects synthetic dyes. Like their mission statement is something to the extent of like spreading the use of colors around the world.
Worldwide.
And if you look at their like associate members, I think what it is, it's like PepsiCo and Coca-Cola and Hershey and Mars.
Like you hear this stuff and you think this is a conspiracy.
No,
this is like literally on their website. They're not even trying to be sneaky about
But
it.
the comment they always make is the FDA has like a thorough review of these chemical additives and has for decades stood behind the fact that they're safe. But those studies are based off of like that statement is based off of studies that are 35 to 70 years old. And at the time, those studies were not capable of detecting the behavioral issues that we now know are caused by synthetic
Also, if you
dyes.
think about longitudinal studies, right? You're having, your son, you could see him within a couple of years, but we now have this out 30, 40 years later. There should be those longitudinal studies that say, hey, after a few decades, we now have enough things to happen to have proper research.
Yeah. I mean, what more do you need? I mean, 27 clinical trials.
Yeah.
And so that's insane.
I think what's been cool about like our place in all of this is, you have Food Babe and you have RFK and you have Maha Movement and you have a lot of these people like referring to the fact that they're not healthy and that there's studies out there. The interesting place that we have is we're not only a family who has a personal experience with our family, but we have this unique perspective of having this group that is specifically synthetic dye with 840,000 members. So like we are hearing the true to life stories that the science says this can affect some kids. Well, we've got the perspective of we've seen the kids that it's affecting.
We're seeing it. It's not just a conspiracy theory.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, yeah. Going back to the whole Red 3, I guess kind of Red 40 deal. I remember when Red 3 was banned the day after your documentary, and I am obviously, I said I was hopeful. I saw a lot of people online that were like, who cares? Like, what about Red 40? Like, what was your response to that?
I mean, it's understandable. I mean, when it's easy to critique a situation when you're not involved in that situation. Like, we've known how much it took and how much effort it took for them to even respond to Red 40 or to even respond to Red 3. And the reality is that the FDA themselves in 1990, they concluded that Red 3 causes cancer in animals.
Right.
And like that was based on studies from the 80s.
Right.
And so they have said for years and years and years, we will address it in food. We're going to address it in food. And that was the year before I was born. I'm 34. Like that's an issue.
Right.
Like that's a you've had plenty of time to reevaluate and to look at Red 3.
Right.
And we've seen a lot of misinformation. A lot of people will say, well, the mechanism that causes cancer in animals isn't the same in humans.
I saw that, yeah.
But the reality is that study didn't even identify the mechanism that caused the cancer. The study said it caused cancer, and that's it.
Right, and they only took it out of cosmetics, right?
So I've been waiting to give this soundbite. Luckily, Lisa, whenever we went to testify in West Virginia, we picked up Lisa from the documentary, and she rode with us for like an hour or two. And I was like, so how do we, like, when people are talking about, I mean, the Red 3 band, they might have done, I think it was done for two reasons. One, to kind of pacify this movement, like, okay, we're done doing something. Also, I think a little bit to like the current, the administration, they wanted to get a win under that administration before.
Right.
They knew they could see it coming. But yeah, that's what they like. The rhetoric is, well, they only banned Red 3 because of the Delaney clause and like the Delaney clause, which says the FDA is not supposed to approve anything that's known to cause cancer in animals.
I feel like it's reasonable, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we know it causes cancer in animals.
But then they take that and they say, so it's not that it
like,
really was dangerous for humans. The study showed that it caused tumors in male mice, but the mechanism that doesn't exist in humans. So I asked Lisa, I was like, so what do we say when people say that? And she's like, well, they never actually identified the mechanism. As a matter of fact, they discovered, they did this study in the 80s. And this was what happened was food got permanently approved. And then when the cosmetic and externally applied drugs industries applied for the same permanent approval, for whatever reason, the FDA told them they needed to do some studies. And so this study came out in the 80s showing the tumors. And basically the FDA kept giving industry an extension. Okay, they gave them 36 extensions to prove that it was safe, to figure out what the mechanism was, and they never did. That's why.
And nearly 36 years.
Nearly 10 years later, they finally would have said, they said you didn't prove that it was safe, so we're going to ban it in cosmetics.
Right.
Of course, they said at the time they were going to take steps to ban it in food. We saw the 35-year waiting period to actually get it banned in food.
Which is funny because if they would have done that, right, this whole like, hey, this takes time for those companies, to your point, that would have never been developed if that had come through early on. And so this is kind of my fight with the FDA. We're learning this even with baby food, right, is that things go on the shelves first, and then they're almost tested later.
Mm-hmm.
And
or never again.
Or never again. And so your issue with your comment or the fight back with these companies saying it takes time, it's going to hurt revenue, it almost makes me, I almost don't feel bad for it, because I'm like, had you taken the steps ahead of time to formulate this, right, then we might not be here where we're fighting what's coming on and off the shelves.
Yeah, we agree. And in Europe, the standards is a little bit different. Like, you have to prove that it's safe before it goes on the shelves. Whereas here in the U.S., it's like we have to prove that it's not safe.
Right.
Whereas the FDA, their definition of safe is proof that there is, or what is it? How is it?
I don't have it written down. It's
hold on one second.
basically you have to prove that it with reasonable
certainty that it doesn't cause harm.
That there's no harm.
Wow, it's just very backwards.
Yeah,
but
we
the
have
reality is
reasonable certainty that there is harm.
Yeah, right. But they're like, no, it's okay. It's already on the shelves. Like, just let it go.
Well, that's the thing. The FDA wants something to prove. They have no,
intention.
They have no. They don't have to reevaluate. Like, they're not required to reevaluate these chemicals. So that's kind of what's happening. Realistically, I think the FDA is probably really understaffed, and that's always their excuse. We're understaffed. We're underfunded. All of our focus is on the pharmaceutical side. There's really not much going on the food side. And then I think it was just like a couple days ago, Kennedy met with a bunch of the ultra processed food companies, the Pepsi and stuff like that. And so the article that I read said his focus that he talked about a lot.
Did they meet with Kellogg's?
I think Kellogg's was there too. One thing he talked about was closing the grass loophole, which would be great. But synthetic dyes don't even fall into the grass loophole. But then also there was another article that we read from. Well, there's two. There's one from New York Times and one from ABC saying that one of his major pushes is to get synthetic dyes out. So I don't know. It's an interesting time. But the grass. Do you know what the grass?
No, I was
going
to ask that. Yeah.
Okay, so luckily synthetic dyes. There's that's another bit of misinformation. Synthetic dyes have never been part of the grass loophole, and they're still not part of the grass loophole. But what it is, it's this loophole that initially, when they put it out there, they thought 1% of additives that come out would fall under this grass loophole. So it's generally recognized as safe. So like if a company is putting turmeric or something that's like a no-brainer that this is probably safe, like it could fall under that grass loophole of generally recognized as safe. But what's happened now is it's more like 99% of additives are labeling themselves with this grass loophole. And what it is the industry themselves can do their own studies, and then all they have to do is say it falls under this grass loophole. Oh, and then it goes in the market. The FDA never even looks at it.
What are some examples of that? So
like hydrogenated vegetable, or is that what it was called? The one that they just banned it. So originally that came in under grass.
Wow.
But at one point the FDA actually took it off the grass list, and then the FDA actually just banned it this past year. So that's they would use that in like sodas and stuff to keep it from separating. That's what it was used for. And then we have there's a whole bunch of stuff. It's like there's thousands and thousands of chemicals in this grass. Like, I don't know if aspartame was part of grass. Probably. But yeah, that's basically these chemicals that the companies can get their own scientists to do the research, and that's been a big issue. And so that's what I've heard one of Kennedy's pushes is to close that grass loophole and make them actually follow a different process.
That's also interesting that you're saying that too. Is like we talk about studies and all of that. You have to really ask yourself. This is where I've gone in this whole loophole, or not loophole. This whole rabbit hole is, where is the study coming from? Who's funding the study?
Exactly.
Right? Whose interest is it in? And then also something I learned was peer-reviewed articles, right? So when you do a study, if you did a study and I reviewed it, I'm only reviewing your findings. I'm not able to reproduce the study. I'm not able to do it under my own terms. It's not what a peer review is. I'm literally looking at your findings, your maps, your graphs. So if your maps, your graphs, and all that are off, I'm reviewing it incorrectly. And so you're seeing a lot of people online, right? Check the science and do your research, right? I would start to argue back, well, where's your research coming from?
Right.
Yeah. Right. And and we've said this a million times, if you're looking for something to basically agree with you, you will find it on the internet.
Yep.
So you really have to go down these stages of, people with personal experience behind things like the food dyes, and then really look at the studies, and then look at who's funding these studies and where these studies are coming from before you actually come around to your decision making. And most people are, we're the Amazon Prime, TikTok generation, where we're like, oh, there it is, there's the answer. And that's not always the case.
Yeah, you're right.
And what's great about the studies is with around synthetic dyes is the most like thorough review that we have right now is the WEHA report, which the Office of Environmental Health Hazards Assessment did in California. And what they did, it's a meta-analysis. So they took all the studies. They took the 27 human clinical trials. They took all the animal studies, all the mechanistic in vitro type studies, and then they had toxicologists and scientists, statisticians review the studies, and then that was peer reviewed, and it was a multi-year. They had public input.
Wow!
And so this was a multi-year process, and basically, they looked at all the studies. They took the evidence that was strong from multiple studies. Okay, this is good, and some stuff didn't make it through. Some of the studies were small, and some stuff had to be thrown out. But so it's thought every scientist that knows about what's going on looks at the WEHA report as like the ultimate source of what's going on with synthetic dyes, and so it's really hard to argue.
And that's the 27 clinical trials, like we're referring to.
Got it.
There's
Okay.
a lot of evidence. But even aside from that, like synthetic dyes are oftentimes a byproduct of petroleum. They're a chemical that's added to our food to make it look more colorful. And the reality is that the only reason why industry uses colors is to market it to us so that it looks beautiful so that we can buy it. Like it's not adding to the taste. Actually, dyes oftentimes have, if you add too much, like it has like a chemically taste.
Yes.
And so it's doing nothing to our food. It's
No
just
nutritional
really
value.
no nutritional value.
So
It's just
its
marketed to us.
its original intent was never to add any nutritional value.
No,
It's
it's just
strictly
to
a
make it.
marketing tool.
It's literally makeup for our food.
Is there not
It's to make it look pretty so that we want to buy it.
Is there not preservatives in it
No.
or any
No
kind of like
preservative value.
binders or anything
Nothing.
like
That's
that?
why this is a no-brainer. It's
Like, just take it out.
Exactly.
You can just take it out. It's just to make our food look more vibrant and appealing.
Well, what do you-
and children love colorful.
Right.
So the oftentimes industry adds it to children's food, and so. Like, and Kellogg's will argue, and Kellogg's, they have Fruit Loops for Canada that are dye-free. They have Fruit Loops for the EU that are dye-free in other countries. But when asked about the U.S., why did you not provide us with an option that's dye-free? And they said, well, we polled children, and they love the bright colors.
course they did.
Of course they do.
They're not
Right?
buying the
Well,
product.
That's the same reason. It's the same reason my mom's like, I'm not buying any of your Montessori stuff because when I come from Target with all my lovely bright colored clothing, I'm like, of course she's gonna want to write the big bright purple dress over the
Right.
maybe neutral colored purple, matte purple.
I love Montessori learning, by the way.
Yeah.
And what's great is like it is a marketing tool, and like that's why it doesn't seem like the FDA is taking any steps. Then they actually have no plans right now to take any steps towards reevaluating food dyes, and like there's a push right now. I mean, obviously. We feel like every angle is important. So, but the angle of like getting the companies to pull it out of the products themselves, that's a great angle. But what's going to happen is if they see their bottom line start to drop and they have no legal requirement to take it out, they're just going to put it back in there. We saw that happen in 2016 when General Mills took it out of Trix. They actually tested it. They took it out of Trix, put it out in the market. I think they actually saw sales go up briefly, and then the internet lost their minds. They took a nosedive, and then they're like, okay, we gotta brighten them back up. And they actually had a campaign. They're back. The bright colors are back. So it's like, but there was no, and you see that in our documentary. Like I think the missing piece of that puzzle is there was never, at that time, there wasn't public education of how these dyes could be harmful. It was more like this is just kind of a more healthy, crunchy, alternative. Like we're trying to get additives out of the food. And like people just weren't there for it, and so they
that
also
would be
saw
a PR
the
nightmare to say, okay, we now know because of the WEHA report. Well, I guess the WEHA report wasn't in play at that point, but we now know that these dyes cause hyperactivity, inattentiveness, sleeplessness, restlessness, irritability, and aggression. So we're going to take them out. Sorry for all these years that we had a chemical in there that could be negatively impacting your child. Like they're never going to say that. They just pulled it out and acted like it was, a healthier option, which it was, and people lost their mind. But like now is a different time.
Yeah, I was gonna say, what happens now if they were to do that?
We do know now, like Panera Bread, all their sweet treats, they're all dye-free. Dunkin' Donuts, all of their, even the sprinkly donuts, they're dye-free, minus some of the holiday
I didn't know that.
I'm back to running on Dunkin'.
Minus the holiday
Now
stuff.
there is so one issue though we've found with Dunkin' is it seems like this isn't like they don't like train anybody with this information.
So you ask.
So if you ask somebody at the counter,
They're not gonna know.
are these dye-free? They normally say no. Of course they're not dye-free.
But you can find on their website.
Their website says it,
they're
but they
sent factory sprinkles.
There's these loopholes though where franchises, if they need stuff, they can just go to the store and buy stuff. And so that's where you can kind of run into issues with Dunkin' Donuts. They might have ran to the store to get sprinkles for the donuts, and you might not know it.
But it's also the funnel effect, because here's what's happening, right? If the person selling it doesn't know how to talk about it, right? It's only coming from a source like you guys, where, if you quote unquote call them crunchy, you may not be going to look because you feel like you're not a crunchy person, right? Yeah. And so if it's not affecting you, you don't care about it, and you see, let's just use Trix as an example. The reason why the sales went down was because all of a sudden it wasn't so pretty and your kid didn't want to eat it. And so you were like, I'm not buying this because my kid won't eat it. Instead of saying, why did my kid change course, right? Because it's the same cereal, technically the same taste. Maybe the taste changed a little bit, but why did it taste a little bit different? Or why did it look a little bit different? And going down that, people don't want to ask those questions. And so from the top down, nobody's getting informed on really what this is and how it affects you guys.
Yeah. But I do think tides are changing. I would hope. And I would even argue that, like, I don't think Dunkin's going out of business and they went dye-free. And I don't think their prices went up. Starbucks, their treats are dye-free. I don't think they're hurting.
We went there today.
No, I would not. I know. We almost were like, I'm not going to go. We're seeing the Dye For documentary. They're too crunchy. We can't go to Starbucks.
But I would say, no.
Burger King, Papa John's.
Burger King. Yeah, but the point is, the rhetoric is, sales are going to go down, prices are going to go up. But Baskin Robbins took it out of their colorful ice cream, and I think they're okay. You know what I mean?
I'm so excited about
these companies are now, where they've learned from Trix. They're not going to make a big outwards expression. Yeah. But now I do feel like natural dyes are coming farther, and like it's like you would never know. If you go to Starbucks, they're bright and they're beautiful and they're vibrant. Same with Panera and Dunkin'. But if you were to compare the two, like, you could probably tell. But unless they're side by side, like, you're not going to notice. And so the lie that they can't do it, we know that that's not true because they're doing it for our counterparts overseas. And the lie that the prices are going to go up, the reality is, I think you should tell them about Aldi.
So whenever part of our testimony in West Virginia, we testified twice in West Virginia, and like we had brought up Aldi the first time we testified, and that seemed to be a point that like they all resonated with. So the day of our second testimony, which we got to do virtually, I just went to Aldi, so I bought a box of Aldi Fruit Loops, or they're called Fruit Rounds, right? Fruit Rounds, Fruit Rounds.
Instead of Loops,
their generic version, and then they were $1.68, and they were 12.2 ounce box. And then went to Walmart and bought a box of regular Fruit Loops that was 8.9 ounces, and it was $3.98. So more than double the price for the. I mean, of course, it's a name brand. They put a lot into marketing.
I mean, this was the argument with organic, though, too. Because there were times where people were like, organic's so much more expensive. And you kind of go down the certain places and you're like,
it depends on where you get it.
Right. You just have to give the
time to do it.
Well, these big organizations, they're going to have a lot of cost padded in, because they do have marketing costs, and they do have, Aldi doesn't. I mean, I have started to see Aldi commercials here lately, but for a long time they didn't market. They didn't advertise.
No, that's Trader Joe's. Trader Joe's doesn't market.
Oh, maybe Trader Joe's.
But
they're, I don't know. So I think there's probably room there. And when you're looking at the scale that these big major corporations, which they're the ones who are like trying to do all the fear mongering about, this is going to drive up prices. Their companies are so big, they're just going to be able to absorb the prices.
It's really a matter of like an inconvenience. Reformulating is not convenient.
When we went to London and bought versions of stuff without dyes, I don't know that I did the conversion to dollar, but they weren't like crazy more expensive,
But Whitney, to your point though, they've already reformulated it, right? They already have that recipe, that secret sauce in the UK. Yeah. So why can't you just replicate it here?
Well, my question is too, like, you're technically taking something out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I don't know, like why?
Well, in the
why
case
is that?
of Fruit Loops, they're instead of having a chemical that's a byproduct of petroleum, which is obviously super cheap, they're using like spirulina or turmeric or something like that, which it in theory could cost a small amount more. But the reality is, like, there are these massive $1-billion industries.
Here's the other issue too. Fruit Loops or whatever cereal, they could just pull the dye out.
Right.
Then they have a brown cereal. And
right.
And like people don't like, that's going to be really hard for people to like.
So the natural alternative is going to be more expensive.
But it depends on the product. Like marshmallows, name brand marshmallows are white. But if you hold up like a Walmart brand marshmallow to like the marshmallow brand, To me, they don't look different. And then also you compare like Doritos, for example, next to like an Aldi Dorito, you really, like in our documentary, we compare the two, like you really can't tell. And so there are certain instances like the ones that we just said where you remove them and it's really not that big of a deal. With like Fruit Loops, that might be a slightly higher cost, but the reality is who's going to pay the price? Because somebody is it our children? Or is it these big companies that they're not going to go under?
Well,
like, they're going to be fine to reformulate.
Well, there's some companies too, like I know in West Virginia that like Chick-fil-A was somebody who came in. They were, I don't know how heavy they were opposed to it, but they were asking them to push back the date. But like they have like synthetic dyes in like 2 products. Like their spicy chicken sandwiches have yellow dye in it, and then
come on, Chick-fil-A.
Like, I mean, it
but
made
then like the cherry in there, the cherry in there.
So your you want your spicy chicken to be a little bit differently colored than your regular chicken, but like how easy would that be to pull out?
Yeah.
And then you're like a leader in the synthetic dye, you know?
Right.
Let's pull the 2 dye.
Were they there fighting to not have it pulled out?
They were trying to get the date pushed back.
Well, that's fighting against you guys. So yeah.
Where do you see this going? Right, like because you're fighting on different fronts essentially with this documentary, right? You're going against corporations coming to these committee meetings, but you also have families and parents who are like, this doesn't happen to my kid. I don't know why this is a thing. This feels like fear mongering. How do you guys on that front start to kind of reel in those parents and help them without feeling like you're giving them the fear, right? Because I think a lot of the crunchy community stuff that we talk about can feel scary.
Yeah.
Well, we have worked really hard, like Brandon said, to try to stick to like only the facts. And the reality is like we've kind of been in this bubble of like people who kind of know about it and are aware. And we are just starting to get out to having people that are asking those questions. And the reality is, like, we always go back to one, there's a lot of evidence that shows that it causes harm. And it's just something to color our food. So if there's even a chance that it's causing harm, which we know, like, and it's really hard for scientists to say something causes something. And we have enough evidence that we know that it causes all of these issues in children, and it's not all children, but in some children it does. And so like we go back to that the reality is there are children who are suffering. And the argument or the confusion that it's like an allergy is hard to wrap your brain around for a lot of people, because I would argue that my child, our youngest, she is allergic to penicillin, and when we gave her penicillin, hives all over her body.
Right.
We immediately called the doctor, and we've never touched penicillin again.
Right.
And so that's an allergic reaction. Whereas our son Atreyu, it was invisible. It's a neurologic reaction. There are people that go their whole lives that have no idea that they're having issues from synthetic dyes. And the reality is, especially people that are medically dependent on like a medication, like you can be taking synthetic dyes daily, several times a day. There's a mom in my group, and she reached out. Actually, several moms have reached out about this issue, but she has a daughter that has epilepsy. And if you know anybody that's epileptic, like you don't mess with their seizure meds. Like they have to be on it. And because every single seizure like impacts the brain in a really negative way. And so her daughter has an allergic reaction to Rev 40, which is actually really common. A lot of people have like a true allergic reaction. And then has a neurologic reaction to all the other dyes. But the only other alternative that could treat her epilepsy had Red 3, which we know causes cancer in animals. Right. And so daily, several times a day, she's taking a medication that has Red 3 that's really just in it to color it. Like, why do we need colors in our medication?
Antibiotics is another big one, right? Because how many times kids get sick or in general, and you're like, hey, we're going to put them on an antibiotic. And I don't think people realize that pink bubblegum medicine that they're giving has Red 40 in it.
Yeah.
You know?
It's an issue.
And so if you're trying to stay away, and I go back to, we talked about seed oils before. Look, if you have one chip with seed oil on it, is it going to hurt you? Probably not, right? What the problem is that it's so prevalent in everything that you're eating that your body cannot detox fast enough. Right. And so if it's in your candies, fine. You're like, I stay away from candies, but it could be in your drinks. It could be in your food. It could be in, your medications. And so your body is being kind of
attacked
on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Well, one thing we've seen too is like we've suggested like there's no harm in eliminating dyes for 2 weeks or 30 days or,
Right.
And what we've heard anecdotally from a lot of parents is they didn't think their kids reacted. They never assumed, but they either joined the group or they saw the film and they just wanted to try it out. And they didn't see a lot of a shift when they removed it, but the second they like gave it back to their kids after the kids had detoxed off of it for 40 days, like they're bouncing off the walls. So it's like, you know,
and
maybe
you always attribute it to sugar, right? Because you're like,
Right.
oh, I gave them a cupcake, they're bouncing off
Right.
the walls, and sugar will go down the path of sugar later. But if you gave them a dye-free cupcake and a dyed cupcake,
Very different, yeah.
you'd have two different experiences.
Well, and that's been something we've heard in like from some of the legislators. How do they know for sure when they do these studies that it's synthetic dye and it's not something else? And we're like, okay, these are double-blind placebo trials. What that means is there is one variable. So this kid over here that gets the placebo, they're drinking the exact same drink as this kid minus the synthetic dyes.
Right.
And so like that's how you know. You isolate that one variable when you do this study. And double-blind means the person administering
Doesn't know.
they don't know, the person taking it doesn't know. Like so the people who are getting it and the people who are administering it, neither one of them know if it's the placebo or if it's the one with the dye in it. So and then you know, in the sense in the European study, they had teachers observe the students, they had the parents observe the students, and they also had people that were doing the study observe the students' behavior over the course of you know, however many weeks it was. And like they came to the conclusion that even in the general population, the kids who had the dye version showed more hyperactivity levels than the kids who had the placebo version.
We'll
So-
have to ask you guys about where to find all these studies, because I feel like that's going to be the big question. Is
Well,
Yeah.
it's on our
find it.
website.
All you gotta do-
documentary.com/resources. It's
you
at
open
the
up the
very bottom of
OEHA
page.
report, that thing is huge, and it
500 pages.
yeah, it's like a big.
Good luck.
Maybe it's
Yeah.
I don't know. But it's
Easy reading.
Hundreds, yeah.
But like I said, that the reason that's so powerful was because it's an analysis. They brought all that information together and then
together.
and then did the meta analysis.
What about you guys? Do you think you'll do a second documentary to this? Is there a follow-up coming
We're
up?
just talking about this.
We were just talking about this. Like
I don't. Well, this documentary was like primarily funded. Like it was self-funded. Like we literally
Yeah,
did
you had
everything.
a little
We
Kickstarter
directed
campaign.
it. We obviously filmed it. We edited it. Composed the music. Created the graphics. Like every single aspect we had to do.
The only people we paid for this film was a distribution consultant to help us understand distribution and
We had to pay
and
a
our
lawyer.
lawyer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you
Yeah.
have to. We didn't know all
Right,
the
'cause you're
ins
making
and outs.
claims, right.
Yeah.
Well, we had to get E&O insurance, which covers us if we get sued, and then
But the production came down to you two.
yeah, but to
Yeah.
get
Well,
E&O
and
to
the
get E&O
funding.
insurance, your lawyer has to watch your film and like make sure you have no copyright infringement
Yeah.
or anything that you're claiming is like
Inaccurate.
fair use, that it falls under fair use. So it was like it was
Well,
a
so
very
we-
long process. But
We funded a good portion of the documentary. Like we were able to create this documentary with about $60,000,
which is
and a good portion of
super
that
cheap.
was our
Yeah.
savings. But then also we did crowdfunding campaigns, which was challenging. But if we were to do another documentary, I would hope that the funding would come somewhere else. So
Yeah.
that we didn't have to like literally pull it out of our savings.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
there's
But now
some
that you have
ideas.
EWG and everybody backing you and knowing
Yeah.
who you are, like I feel like you guys are celebrities in
Yeah.
this space. So
Yeah.
like I think you should have that
Yeah.
funding. So
I feel like if we
We'll
wanted
throw
to
it
do,
up.
I feel like well, obviously if we wanted to do another film, we would have a much easier kickoff point. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like
Yeah.
we've done it
what
now.
would you focus on this round?
So this is gonna be hard.
We've never said this on a podcast.
This is
Oh,
it
sorry.
would be hard for me because it is something I'm trying to work
No,
on. Is like
good.
like sugar-free drinks and stuff like that. But we ask whenever we were filming Lisa in the documentary, I'll even hear her say that synthetic dyes are towards the top of her list of additives that she's concerned about. So in that interview, what's not in the documentary is well, what is it what's at the top of your list? And she said artificial sweeteners. So like. It's gonna be tough for me because I know it's something I need to give up anyways. I don't drink them all the time, but like I will buy like it's dye free. I'll buy an energy drink every now and then or a Coke Zero or something.
We're on a
So-
journey.
I'm on a journey.
Actually, Brandon is on a
But I
journey.
know that if I go down that rabbit
Everybody's
hole,
on their own journey. It's all on their own time,
I know it's probably not good. It's not good, and it's something that I'm trying to just like seed oils. We don't cut them out
It's
completely.
hard.
That's
but we're
hard.
obviously
The products that we buy are seed oil free. We cook seed oil free, but when we go to a
Restaurant. That's
Right.
exactly how I am. I'm like 80-20.
Yeah.
Yeah.
we have friends that are completely seed oil free, and like in our town,
they also have no children.
two
so I
places
feel like
they
that's a
can
little
eat.
easier.
Yeah.
Yeah, because a lot of the snacks, right? There's
Yeah.
easy snacks. We were trying to find like not Cheez-Its, but the cheese curls. There's not one out there without a seed oil. And if it is, it's not real cheese,
Well, and
cheese.
you gotta-
It's vegan, right?
Well,
so
and what's
like,
happening now is like there's I don't know if you've seen some of the drama. There's like restaurants and stuff trying to jump on the Maha bandwagon and the seed oil train. Mm-hmm. And like Steak and Shake has done this big campaign about how they're cooking in tallow now, but apparently the story is their fries are flash fried and then frozen in seed oils before they get sent off to them.
Oh, I thought it was just
and
like
so Alice Clark and Steak and Shake have been arguing back and forth on like X and stuff.
Okay. There's a place here that I love for burgers called Hop Daddy. And then they are like grass fed, seed oil free, but they use like something called Zero. Which I think that's kind of under the gun of blend. The blend of where that actually originally came from. No. But I'm like, dang, man, I thought I found one seed oil free like fast food restaurant.
For a little while, we thought that like Buffalo Wild Wings was tallow, but it's a tallow blend, so it's like not pure tallow.
But at least the conversation is
happening.
Right. Yeah. So I would argue that yes, it's not perfect.
That one little step.
Yeah.
But none of us are, right? Like we went and got Starbucks this morning, which is against my religion. But I was like, we're not doing Starbucks, and she's like, we have 5 minutes. I was like, we're doing Starbucks.
Well, even when we started the film, like towards early on, even while we were making the film, it was more like, let's focus on Atreyu being dye-free.
No, this was everybody dye-free except on occasion Brandon was not.
But then obviously,
now we're 100%
the more we learned,
dye-free.
the more we listened to the researchers, and the more like I was like, okay, I don't need to be eating this either.
Right. And you learn like it's not just the behavioral effects, and it's not just like the hyperactivity. We know that Rev 40 can increase your susceptibility to colitis. Yellow 5 and Yellow 6 may contain carcinogenic components. Many children have allergic reactions to Yellow 5, Yellow 6, and Rev 40, and Red 3 and Yellow 5 can be genotoxic, which means it can damage your DNA, which can turn into a tumor, or can damage your DNA and could be passed from you to your child, or from your child to their child.
And that's what my chiropractor was trying to say about how we've gotten here, right? Yeah. Like how our children are having these mutations or genetic differences, right? I won't say disorders, but she was explaining like, you have Generation X who was part of like this instant like industrial toxic revolution of like sex, drugs, and rock and roll and all that fun stuff that came in it, and and the big food industry kind of making their way. And then our generation grew up with, I was like, McDonald's every Friday. Yeah. Right? First Friday, I went to Catholic school and we had half days on first Friday.
Little Debbie
I got
every
a
day.
Big Macs and Dunkaroos and all that stuff, right?
Dunkaroos.
We were the processed generation. They were like easy, quick. Mom needs a meal.
It was a good time.
What was that little
It was a good time.
What was it? TV dinners with the penguin on the front, God only knows what that was made of.
Yeah, those.
The tongue tattoo, like fruit roll-ups.
But what about the
colored
sunscreen
popcorn
that was like blue or purple that went on and then turned like see-through? Isn't that wild?
No, or just Claire's makeup. Like if you're like, oh my God.
Makeup, that's a whole
another
level of like dye issues.
We were like purple, blue, red, right? Like limited to all the smells that came from Hollister.
Oh my gosh.
You're like, we literally exposed ourselves to every toxin on the planet. And now we're having kids. And so we're all like, what's happening?
Yeah.
And you're like, can you imagine that your body didn't detox it? Where is it going to go? The placenta can only protect so much. So it really, you start looking at generational things, and you think like, I got my red hair from my mom, or I got my brown eyes from my dad. What else are you taking in from mom and dad when you're being born? And so it's a no-brainer for me to just try to eat as healthy as I can possibly, like organ meats, right? We were like doing that with baby.
We're doing that.
Yeah. So she's on the path to having another baby. I'm like,
exciting.
So where can people find you and your documentary?
So we're on our major like social platforms. We're on is Facebook is our biggest one, and we're also on Instagram, and it's just at To Die For The Documentary on both of those. And then we're also, our website is todieforthedocumentary.com, and we have a resources page with a whole bunch of resources like templates for writing your representatives and your school boards. And then it's also, there's a link there to all the platforms that the film's on. So the film's on Amazon Prime, it's on Apple, it's Google, Fandango. And then, so those are kind of the places. And then if you want to directly get to us, our emails are on our website too, and we're pretty responsive on social media, and we try to, it is just the two of us, and so I think a lot of people don't realize that.
Yeah.
Because I feel like we've produced something that's high level.
You have. It's really well done.
Like it's done by two parents from Georgia, but
it looks amazing.
But it's still just the two of us. But we try to respond as much as possible. And
and then also if you have people listening that they don't really know about dyes and they want to kind of give it a try, on our resources page, kind of toward the middle, I have a blog that walks you through like how to eliminate it. Look at your pantry, look at your frozen foods, your soaps and things like that. So that's a really great starting point for people. Also, if people subscribe on our website, I send out like a list in every single email, a list of dyes, surprising places you can find them, brands that are dye free. And then if you want to get involved with like the policy, like we always in our email list, like I will let you know what's going on in the policy world and like how you can get involved. So
yeah, and that's kind of where our focus has shifted at the moment is the legislation, working with multiple states. We want to do a Facebook Live here soon where we because we've learned a lot in the past month. We learned a lot, and so we want to help people figure out how to get in touch with their legislators and stuff.
Because everybody's at, you guys are probably at what, phase 11, right? There's always someone that's at phase 1, chapter 1, and where do I start? So I would start at the documentary if I were you guys. It's awesome. It's so insightful. It opens your eyes to a lot of things. And then Whitney, even a huge, resource. Brandon obviously as well. But just as a mom, it has been, you are a true person that I feel like we look up to in the mom world. So I really appreciate you guys coming out and talking to us. Because,
Thank you.
Leaders in this space. So until next time.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Truth Moms. Remember, mamas, the truth starts at home.
If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. It really helps us reach more moms like you. And plus, it's free.
Until next time, stay strong, stay curious, and we will keep dropping those truth bombs. Bye.